All right, we finally got some closure on the topic of Dustin Poirier versus Tony Ferguson. Is that going to happen in the very near future? So Poirier had come out, just to remind you guys of the timeline, and said, "Hey, Dana's got my number." And we talked over here and said, "Well, what did he mean by number? Did he mean Dana knows how to get a hold? Dana can call me, or did he mean I have a very specific financial incentive that I'm going to need? But if that happens, I'm in." It looks as though it was the latter of the two. Dana came out, he was talking at the press conference over the weekend, and he said, that fight is done. We're not going to try to salvage it. We're done. We're moving on. We're going to find another opponent for Tony. There's a couple of things in that statement. First off, okay, that whole Poirier versus Tony was a rumor. Now it sounds as though from Dana, we've got a confirmation that the Tony part of that not only is not just a rumor, it's going to happen, but it's still going to happen. Now the question is, well, who's he fighting? And you got to understand, if you're talking Poirier and Tony, there's a lot on that. I mean, not only is that just going to be a really fun match that you're going to have to sit around and argue till you're blue in the face who's going to win that, and you're going to be able to argue. You could take either guy and make a very meaningful and compelling argument. It's one of those things, but that's very fun. If you're a fight fan, yeah, watching the fight's a cool thing. Got some friends around, a little pizza there. I understand it. But to be able to talk about it for a couple of weeks before it's going to happen, that's just as fun. What do you do when the fight's not happening? 15, 25-minute fight. What do you do when it's not happening? Well, you talk about it. That's what you do. You could do that with this fight, but here's what I want to share with you. Who should Tony fight now? That's really the only question that we're going to have. And I think you've got a couple of very likely suspects. But I don't know how much you have to go off the rankings or the wins and the losses, right? I mean, that's one thing about Tony from Jump Street. When Poirier steps in and says, yeah, I'll fight Tony. Tony's coming off a loss. Poirier's coming off a big win. Generally, winners take on winners and losers take on losers. But I think we can understand and all agree that when it's Tony Ferguson, it doesn't make a damn bit of difference. It does not matter. A guy's done enough lifting. You've already forgotten whether his last win was an up or a down, right? Just one of those things. He's a very dangerous guy. You can't necessarily follow that code. You need to bring somebody in that can protect themselves. Tony's going to hurt you. Tony's hurt world champions before. It's just one of those things. Then don't forget the element that Khabib out of nowhere put on that by saying, yeah, if you go beat Tony Ferguson, I will fight you. Whoever beats Tony. It can be anybody. You get through Tony, you come to me. Well, that's very interesting to me too. Because I would imagine that means if Tony wins his next fight, okay, great, then I'll fight you, Tony. And the mere idea of booking that fight for a sixth time, now I was annoyed by 3. I was out by 4. I was betting against it by 5. You want to book that fight a sixth time? That's interesting to me. The same exact thing that I would have been annoyed about, I would have bet against. I might have even cheered against just to have 5 swings at the bat, just to have that topic matter alone would be interesting. You want to book that fight a sixth time? You got me back in. There was a Family Guy. Oh gosh, was this an annoying scene. So Peter is trying to get a frog out of the room. There's a frog in the room, like on the wall, and Peter is trying to lift it through the windowsill. And somehow he missed. He goes to lift the frog, but the frog's leg sticks, so the whole frog falls down. It never gets to the window. So he goes back and tries it again. He goes back and tries it again. It was so painfully annoying. They stayed on that scene for 2 minutes. And by the 14th and 17th and 19th time that Peter's trying to get the same frog through the same window by doing the same thing that has already failed him, you're laughing. And you're now interested. And it's the exact same thing that was just annoying that you don't want it to end. And there is something about that. I only offer that because the Tony versus Poirier fight, that was very interesting, and some of it was just by accident. Like, yes, you have these 2 maniacs that are going to put on the show of a show. Then you have Khabib signing off on it, saying, I'll take on the winner. And he's already said he plans to go through Gaethje and GSP, but now he's given somebody else a promise as well, and he's a man of his word. I mean, it just started to get really interesting. I would suggest for you that when it comes to Tony, though, and I'd like to elaborate on the thought I was having a moment ago before I digressed into Family Guy, is it doesn't have to be by the rankings with Tony. You don't have to follow the general principle of whoever won his last fight takes on somebody else that won their last fight and vice versa for the silver medals. You just don't have to do that with Tony. And I think if you were to look at the rankings at 155, understanding that what is on the line. Khabib himself has said, if you beat him, I will fight you. Now it takes a third party to make that fight happen, but Khabib is at least saying yes. That's meaningful and that matters. So if you turn to a ranking and go, okay, we can't get Poirier, let's call Charles Oliveira by example. You would see where that could be met with a level of resistance. And even though he could do great with Tony and good for them, do you want to see that as much as Tony versus another booking? Oh, and by the way, if we are to take these factors at their word, which in fairness, we should not because they are just words, but if we are, could you imagine that Oliveira is one fight away from being in there with Khabib? I think that would probably stretch your imagination a little bit. It would seem he's a couple more. Some guys are one win and some guys are 1 year, and no part of this is a commentary on Charles Oliveira in a negative way. No part. Big fan. I'm sharing with you. Well, here, let me just get to the chase. Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker versus Tony Ferguson. What do you think? Do you have any problem with that? Is any part of you going to turn to the rankings and complain? Is any part of you going to say, well, you know, their last fight? Are you going to do any of those things? And you would also see where that could be very interesting when we're in a sport in a space that is about being given an opportunity. You are giving nothing else in this sport except for an opportunity. So could you imagine that Hooker goes out there, he comes up short against Poirier. Poirier doesn't want the opportunity for whatever reason. Hooker goes and takes it. Hooker ends up getting an opportunity even though he lost his previous match because the guy that won the match doesn't want it. That's the way sports work. If you are in a tournament and you do not show up to the mat, there is now a forfeit and that other person will move on. I'm only suggesting for you, if I was to predict who will at least be called and offered that fight, and it's purely a prediction, I haven't talked to anybody at all, but I would like to go ahead and float the idea past you. See what you think of Ferguson versus Hooker.